Okay, after sharing some of the views on why teaching literature, but also on the main difficulties that we find when we want to do so, it's time for us to revise some ideas. First of all, ideas that come from the curriculum that is implemented in the province of Buenos Aires, and then to go back and take a deeper look at visual literacy and at the intercultural learner. So we're going to start our journey revisiting the curriculum. We know that in the past, the primacy of the linguistic exponents in the contents made the lessons look a little bit like the photo that we are going to see right now. The idea was that students needed to be well equipped with a knowledge of linguistic rules and a knowledge of grammar, and then they had to put that into practice in an endless list of exercises. So the core of the English lesson was the linguistic exponent, the grammar, as it were. And so many of the didactic decisions that were made had to do with providing exercises. Well, these days, there's no longer a primacy of linguistic exponents in the teaching of English, but we like to think of content as anything that goes around and anything that happens in the English lesson. This means considering the context, the linguistic exponent, the tasks and the language practices that are associated with putting the language in use. If we think about the contexts in particular, we know that the curriculum is organized in terms of the contents related to daily life, the contents related to the school, and the literature content, or the context, I should say. If we explore daily life, then we are going to find reasons to explore what students do at home, what students do at school. The school contents require a look at the specific subjects that students have to deal with as part of the school program. This is a good opportunity to embark upon school projects that relate to, for example, biology or social studies. But the literature context is not on every occasion considered to the full, and we have great opportunities to explore many ideas, and particularly the way we think and the way others think. Some of the benefits of using literature, well, it helps to develop creativity and imagination. The idea that we can think about the reasons, the motives characters may have for behaving in one or another way, that idea allows us to explore what we would do if we were in those circumstances, and this fosters creativity and imagination. It also helps to develop cultural awareness. We know that sometimes thinking about culture implies no longer thinking about my way of looking at things, but also different perspectives, multiple perspectives. We can gain insight from what other people think and the way other people feel. And literature also helps to develop creative writing and oral skills. We may find it useful when we have good reasons to say something, when we find that we want to communicate what we think, not only use language for the sake of language. As regards the ideas behind literature, we need to go back to the notion of visual literacy. The idea behind visual literacy is that we can read and write visual texts. The whole concept of visual literacy, the idea, was coined in 1968 by John Debs, and he portrayed this vision that anything that we see, anything that we can represent in symbolic elements in an image can be read, can be analyzed, and we can go beyond just the image. Anyway, when we think about visual literacy in picture books for kids, then is usually the image that accompanies the text. But sometimes that image can go beyond the text and can help us explore different ways of approaching the text. As regards now images, we said that they accompany text. despite sometimes being subsidized in terms of the relevance that they have in the text, we need to find good reasons to go beyond that perspective and to think of images in a whole new way. First of all, they are not transparent. It is important that we think about the representation of a way of thinking or just a specific thought in an image, which is not naive, which is not innocent. Images are not transparent. They do not translate directly. Sometimes a whole lot of thinking has been embodied in an image, in a picture, in a drawing. Not only that, but also the fact that in the classroom we find lots of images. We are bombarded with information and also with images, and they come into the classroom through a variety of devices, namely the mobile. Present us with the possibility to be captivated by lots of images, still images, videos, you name it. This also poses new forms of knowledge and learning. We need to learn to decode the messages behind images, and this should give us good reasons to foster critical thinking and to think beyond what we see. Images have the power to mediate and create reality. So these days, the many uses we give to language as the materialization of thought. Well, the materialization of thought can also take other forms, in this case, the image, not only the language. And this, once again, as I was saying before, provides us with opportunities to develop critical thinking, to go beyond what we see. Now that we are talking about images, just to give you an example of how they are not transparent and they can communicate more, let's take a look at some examples related to education. We are going to see now on screen some images that are worth considering. Take a look at the first one. What does this image tell us about education? Is this the way parents, for example, think of the school, think of the teacher in particular? The teacher as the person who makes efforts and goes to great lengths so that all students can think the way he or she thinks. Just something to think about, good food for thought. Take a look at the other image. This is similar, but we have another character, for example. We have a parent, and the parent is coming to school maybe with hopes, with great expectations, to find that the teacher is going to be working towards one specific goal, to make everyone pretty much look alike. Or the last one, this is a little bit harder even, because we can find the opportunity that students, that very young children have of flying with their imagination. But here comes the teacher, ready to do what? To foster that possibility? Quite the reverse. So this is just a way of looking at images and rethinking the messages that images convey. Maybe all of these pictures have something in common, and this is the way we have traditionally thought of education and the school as an attempt to create certain homogeneity that is probably quite deserving of a second thought. So, we had a look at visual literacy, we had a look at images, then we also need to take another look, a deeper look at the intercultural speaker, at intercultural competence. If we think about the intercultural, then we need to necessarily think about culture in the first place. And what is culture? Maybe many of us can think about the question and come up with a possible answer. But that possible answer maybe deserves rethinking. The way we think of culture is the way we have just presenting, a dynamic and at times contradictory way of thinking, acting upon and perceiving reality, which is characteristic of a social group. Let's take a look at the words that define culture. Dynamic, it is not fixed, it is flexible, and it's in a constant state of change. It is at times contradictory because we all belong to a social group, but we do not hold on to the same ideas and beliefs. And culture represents the way that we think about reality, the way that we act upon reality, and the way we perceive of it, no question about it. So these are some of the components that we probably think about first when we are presented with an idea about culture. It is important that we consider that in every social practice there are issues around meaning and the meanings we assign to each of these practices. Sometimes we can find the typical or the so-called eternal confrontation between homogeneity and heterogeneity. This is one concept that usually comes to mind when we think about the meanings that we assign to social practices. Those meanings are expressed in different ways through gender, age, religion, ethnicity, generation, sex, social class, language, and many more. Some have been defined, some have been degraded, and others discriminated against, just because they represent that which is different, otherness. It is important that when we think about culture, we bear all these things in mind. We need to keep reminding ourselves that we live in unequal societies, where we can find certain groups with more or less possibilities to make their perception of the world, their own view and their own values prevail over others. An intercultural education is an education that implies thinking about educating all individuals. It is about not educating those that seem to belong to minority groups so that they resemble more those cultural values that become hegemonic. So educating from an intercultural perspective implies educating all individuals. It is important, very important, and you need to be reminded of this, that we think of identities as symbolic representations of reality that are socially constructed. They are not legacies that we have passively inherited. We keep constructing the ideas behind and the ideas that provide the source of reality. Take a look at that image. We can think about one objective reality, but different ways of subjectively thinking of that object. All these ideas, in a way, come together when we also think about a foreign language. Our identity is transformed every time that we learn. This is evident when we are faced with the task of learning a foreign language. A foreign language involves encountering others, but also encountering oneself. And this is the good thing about learning another language. We get to learn how to communicate through a different linguistic code, but we also benefit from that as we rethink our own culture and our own processes of encoding, thinking, and perceiving reality. We need to consider that every time learners speak, particularly foreign language learners speak, they are not only exchanging information, but they're actually going beyond the mere trespassing of information with an interlocutor. They're organizing and reorganizing a sense of who they are and how they relate to their social circumstances, to the social world. They are, in other words, engaged in constructing their identity and negotiating it all the time, as Norton has consistently stated. So, after having thought about all these ideas, what kind of student should we aim for? It used to be the case many years ago, I want to believe it is no longer the case, that the native speaker was the model. The idea was that our students had at their disposal a package of contents in terms of grammar and in terms of pronunciation that resembled the native speaker. The good news is that that is no longer the model that we should be trying to implement, or that we should go for. As Michael Byram has clearly stated, the goal should be developing an intercultural speaker. Now, what is an intercultural speaker? This is one who can adapt linguistically to the circumstances that he finds himself in. He is adept to that circumstances, but he's no native-like proficient, if you see what I mean. He does not behave in the linguistic way that a native speaker would behave. There's no need for him to do so, provided he can adapt to the circumstances, and he can prove, he can communicate, he or she can communicate. An intercultural learner is one who has skills which enable him or her to identify the norms and the values and the behaviors of the groups that he meets and the groups he exchanges information and feelings with. We need to think about this new goal for our learners, intercultural speakers. Corbett has clearly stated as well what an intercultural learner should be. As regards many other authors that have provided us food for thought, ideas to keep thinking about, we find Claire Cramsch, a specialist on language and culture. She claims that the central concern of foreign language acquisition is addressing one big issue, wanting to express one view of the world through the language that is normally used to express another society's view of the world. So we should not conform to English in the way the English perceive of the world. We should make use of the language so that we can be critical about the way other people think, the way we think, and use the linguistic code for our own purposes, for reasons of our own. That is a problem. It's not easy to find a solution for it, but we need to change the perspective so that we can start generating different activities in the classroom that go into this line. Let's take a look at one picture right now that can provide us with some modeling of what I have been talking about. We can take a look at two women with different characteristics, and we can also think about what each of them is thinking. This tells us that we change the culture, we change the view of the world, we change the perception of reality. And the more we can understand this, the more we can become that intercultural speaker that we need to make the focus of our teaching actions in the class. Okay, time for reading and discussing. This time we're going to be reading one chapter from a very good book that I recommend, Literature with a Small L by John McRae. And I'm going to ask you to get together once again in small groups and share your reading of the first chapter. And when you do so, I want you to focus on the three questions that are now going to be on screen. What does literature with a small L refer to? What is the difference between a representational and a referential use of language? And what is the impact that McRae's ideas have on language teaching? After you share your reading and discuss ideas, I want you to reflect upon these three questions. When we connect live, we are going to be sharing once again what each group has been thinking about, and I'm going to need my helpers once again to be there for me. See you in a minute.